So, look at this African map. Before the Europeans drew imaginary lines as borders, you could walk from Cape Town to Cairo without anyone bothering you. Actually, most of the trade activities used to happen along the coastline, and a few of the Europeans who had managed to set foot in Africa had very little information of what was going on in the interior parts of Africa. Well, there's a reason for this. They were being affected by mosquito bites, and most of them died from malaria. Now, after the abolition of slave trade, Europe's economy was crumbling, and with the rise of their industries, they needed market for their products and more raw materials for their industries. And also don't forget to maintain their power and influence. So in order to achieve this, there was only one continent that was rich and was never exploited. In 1884, Berlin, these guys sit down and decide how they're gonna grab this piece of land for themselves and exploit it for their own benefit. Mind you, no any other African was invited. So these guys come along with their guns and start grabbing rich pieces of land and forcefully displacing the locals. On top of that, they introduced systems that only worked in their favor, and most of the Africans were mistreated and forced to work in very harsh conditions. Look at these disturbing images of Congolese people. All age groups were forced to work, and those who refused, their arms were being amputated and even beaten to death. In fact, King Leopold killed more than 12 million people in Congo. So Britain, Germany, France, Belgium, all these countries are exploiting Africa's resources and shipping them back to Europe. In fact, there's a British Prime Minister who said, "We abjure the vulgar and bastard imperialism of irritation and provocation, aggression, of clever tricks and maneuvers against neighbors and grabbing everything even if we have no use for it for ourselves." Gold, tea, coffee, and even African artifacts were being shipped to European museums. Now, 60 years after independence, most African countries are still being exploited by the systems left behind by the colonizers. There's a new form of colonization and exploitation. It doesn't involve guns or forced labor. You see, every year, more than $203 billion is being sent overseas from Africa, and Africa only receives $162 billion as remittance. That is, $41 billion is being extracted from Africa. Countries like Congo, Sudan are ever in civil war. But who is benefiting from the war? Let's look at Sudan. There's a civil war between two armed forces, RSF and SAF. War is expensive. It needs money and funding. Turns out, in this war, there are other key players here, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. For this war to continue and for the armed forces to get funding, Sudan's gold is being mined illegally and sold cheaply in the Gulf market, never benefiting any Sudanese citizen. This is one of the many scenarios where Africa is not benefiting from its resources, but rather enriching other foreign countries. Another scenario is how the Western powers have created a monetary system that they use on Africa to extract billions of dollars each and every year. They be like, "Hey, I see your country is doing very good, so maybe we can give you a boost so that you can boost your economy. But with this money, you'll just pay a simple interest." But in reality, most of the African countries are still struggling with their economy. And with inflation every year, African countries still remain slaves to the West. It's very hard to travel from an African country to a European country, but it's very easy to travel from a European country to African country. This is a $1 billion European business in Africa, and nobody really talks about it. Right now, most of the Western powers and countries are trying so much hard to set their foot in Africa. But do they really want to serve Africa's interest? Or they just want to do it the same exact way they did back in 1884? So, you see, countries like China right now is investing so much big in Africa, like building roads, building ports, funding these massive projects. But what do China get in return? You see, China's industries need raw materials, which a bigger percentage of those raw materials are found in Africa. So how do they exploit it? You see, By funding these massive projects, the government give them a direct access to these minerals, where they mine and extract them and ship them back to China. So the question is, even after 100 years, why is it Africa still very important for the global power and influence? Why is it a country like France still fighting to remain in those countries they colonized 60 years ago? They're still fighting to remain in those countries, still fighting to set their military bases in those countries, still fighting to have their companies in those countries. Why is it these European nations still donating billions of dollars in form of aids to Africa, while in their countries they are also struggling with their economies? You see, there's a hidden agenda and interest which nobody really talks about.